Welcome to Love Your Life After Divorce, the podcast where you'll learn everything you need to know to rebuild your life after divorce from the inside out. Let's dive in. All right, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited today to have a special guest. We have AnnMarie Chereso with us, and I'm just going to let her start by introducing herself. Just tell us whatever you want to share about your own personal background and your journey as a coach.
Well, hi. Thank you for having me, Angie. It's fun to be here. So I'm a conscious relationship coach and I work primarily with women. But you know in your own business how things evolve. So I've evolved from working with children and family systems and couples and women are sort of like the matriarchs of the home, the head of the household, and a lot of the center of the family system. So I do a lot of work with women, and I came to this whole journey of coaching 20 some odd years ago when I was going through my divorce. And there's nothing like going through a big life experience to create transformation in your life, as you well know. Um,
Mhm.
and I learned so much during that process. And it really changed my perspective on the way I was living my life, the way I was perceiving my life experiences, the way I'd been conditioned to experience life. And as I started to wake myself up along this journey, I started to see how important it was to be more mindful, to be more conscious, to be more self-aware in our lives so that we can really step more into our empowerment. And the more I started to do that, the more my relationships started to change. First, my relationship with myself, and then, automatically my relationship to others changed. So rather than me trying to change others to get what I wanted out of my relationships, I started to see that the only change I could actually make was the one within myself. And if I wanted anything on the outside to change, I had to start with myself. And so I started sharing what I was learning with others, and then, like organically kind of led into this world of coaching and supporting others through their life experiences. So, and then of course, what I was learning things, and I was like, well, I want my kids to have these tools. I want my kids to know these things. Like these are important things that they're not learning in school and that they're not learning in their communities. And actually, they're learning the opposite. And so, how can I teach them so that they're armed with these tools in their life earlier than I was, so that they can start to shape their lives in a more powerful way from an earlier stage in life? So, yeah. So, I mean, I could go on and on. I started teaching mindfulness very early on, 17 or 18 years ago in schools to littles, like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. And then I graduated and started working with kids at all stages in schools. So I really wanted to impact the school system. Like, how are we arming our kids in schools? And kids are suffering with anxiety and depression and so much stuff. What's the core of that? So I wanted to give schools the opportunities to provide tools right there, like where it was happening, so that our kids can learn to thrive. And what I found was the kids get it. The kids got it. It's the adults who really needed the support. So I started working with educators, and then I was working with parents. And, it was sort of like this three-legged stool, kind of addressing all three legs of the stool so that the kids could take what they're learning or what they actually already know, because they're already really tapped into their intuition, they're knowing themselves. And then the parents could support that. So actually, what I found was kids were teaching their parents what the parents needed to know to really get back to their place of, I call it home, your home center, your home base.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So much of what you said, I want to like dive into and pick apart and ask you all these questions about it because, oh, thank you so much for sharing all that. That's amazing. I guess two things that really stand out to me about what you just shared. One is that I fully believe that, our relationships with ourselves are the most important relationships we have. And I talk about that a lot on my podcast as well. And, you really highlighted that in your own journey. You noticed when you started changing the relationship you have with yourself, when you started becoming more grounded, more in tune with who you really were, when you started changing things about yourself, how you viewed yourself, how you treated yourself, it affected all your relationships. And that's what I really want to convey in my podcast and just my message in general is that that is the foundation for everything. That's why I say that after divorce, you change your life from the inside out. You have to change yourself first. It all comes back to that and to our relationships with ourselves. And yeah, and I'm so glad we connected. And I didn't say this right off the front end, but we kind of found each other, I think. Well, you reached out to me about being on the podcast and I found you on Instagram. And just when I listened to what you were sharing, I was like, oh yes, like we're very aligned in our views and just how we help women primarily. So anyways, I'm so glad to have you here. It's just such a delight already in this brief intro just to hear what you have to say. So I can't wait to continue this conversation. But then also, like you pointing out when you worked with children and you realized, oh, they already get it. I think we're born with the innate knowing of who we truly are. And then unfortunately, we're like conditioned out of that.
Yep.
And I think so many of us, especially women, are conditioned through the years to no longer be in tune with ourselves, to no
Yep.
longer understand what we really need and want and who we really are. And we end up living our lives primarily to please other people or to fit a certain expectation. And then we lose that. And so
Yep.
I love your description of like coming home to yourself. And that's exactly what I love helping women with too, especially after divorce, like being such a pivotal time in life that you're in this big transition. And a lot of women up to that point have been trying so hard to fit into that expectation, to live their lives a certain way. And then divorce for whatever reason happens. It's such an opportunity to come home to yourself. So anyway, I just want to reiterate all of that. And I love it so much. And that's so
And I,
fascinating too, that you worked with different like stages, like kids and then their parents and then the school and like
yeah,
bringing all those pieces together. I'm sure
yeah,
is so powerful.
yeah. And I think it's important to say, and one of the things, I mean, I don't think it's uncommon, but when we're going through divorce, much of us spend a lot of time in the blame game. Like someone did something, there's something wrong over there, they did this terrible thing, and this is why it's not working. And um, there's a both and to that. Like it is true that we're often experiencing disharmony in our relationships. But when we spend so much of our time and energy over there looking at how the other is being wrong, and it's not to say that bad things aren't happening or unfortunate things aren't happening. I mean, there are all sorts of unfortunate things that happened in my, last marriage. Um, but there's a co-creation that we're not necessarily acknowledging. And, there's this patriarchal paradigm that's impacting us as women, but it's also impacting our men. And so, when we can see that more clearly, we can enter our relationships from a place of more empathy, more compassion, more clarity, that we're all sort of coming at these relationships from a place of disconnection, like you so aptly pointed out. We're all disconnected from our center, not just us as women, but men too. And so, from those places of disconnection, we're just creating lots of like ick, like we can't actually connect. If we can't connect to ourselves, there's no possible way we can connect with another human being. So you're so right in focusing on this idea of like connecting to self first. When we connect to ourself, we are much more likely to be able to connect with others. But I do think it's important. One of the things that I've come to over the last 20 years is like, oh, like, yeah, my ex-husband was sort of part of this system of the patriarchal system too. He also was conditioned, he was also programmed, he was also inside of this construct that wasn't necessarily serving him, and all our men are. So when we start to see the dysfunction, the collective dysfunction, the systemic dysfunction that's happening in society, and how we're all part of it, we can get out of the blame game a little bit and get more into our power. Now, that doesn't mean we stay in the relationships. That doesn't mean, that doesn't mean we necessarily change our course, but we can start to see more clearly and then make our choices from that place, from a more powerful place. And I think,
Mm,
you and I were talking a little bit about parenting and co-parenting and what that's like as we're, leaving our marriages. And now we're like faced with parenting these little human beings who we're responsible for shaping. Like we are responsible for who they are becoming to a certain extent. And understanding that they too are sort of swimming in this collective consciousness that's shaping who they are becoming. And we're like a salmon swimming upstream. We're trying to like undo all the dysfunctional, programming that's going on out there. And it's not an easy task, I think. I don't know how you're finding it in your life and your role as a parent, but I find it very challenging these days.
yeah. Well, let's get a little more specific if we can and just talk about, well, first of all, how old were your kids when you got a divorce and how long
Yeah.
has it been since you've been
Yeah. So
divorced?
I was 6 weeks pregnant with my third child when our marriage started to unravel. And it took, a long time for like to sign on the dotted line. But my husband moved out the month she was born. And so she was a newborn. And then my daughter was 3 and my son was 5. So they were newbies. They were really, really little. And now they're in their 20s, 20, 24 and 27, 26, something like that. I have to go do the math. I think my son's 20. Um, and it's been a journey. It's been a really crazy journey. I was at the time I was, you know, mom to a newborn and 2 littles. I was out of my mind with fear. I created a load of drama and conflict inside that circumstance because I was so resistant to the idea of getting divorced. Like I thought that was the worst possible outcome for all of us. And I was like unconsciously doing everything I could to not let that happen. And, so I was just in a constant state of resistance, resistance, resistance. And it caused so much conflict and so much drama in the family system. And it created me as unavailable to my kids. And, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know lots of women out there are listening in and don't want to get divorced. I understand it. Of course, I still like my kids are in their 20s and they still hate the idea of being divorced, although they don't want me and their dad to be married, but they don't want to be inside of a divorced family system, right?
So
So,
was there I'm sorry to interrupt you, but was
yeah,
there a point or where you did come to acceptance or was it a gradual or do you remember was there a moment where you were just like, wait a minute, this isn't working? Or you just naturally started accepting it and you realized the shift in what
yeah,
that did for you?
yeah, it's a good question. I think I spent a fair amount of the early years in resistance. Like this isn't right. Now I was raised in a, upper middle class, not upper middle class, just a middle class Catholic family. Divorce was not a thing we did. So that was one of the first programs. Like, you don't get divorced. You stay together for the kids. You stay together for the kids was the message I received growing up. Um, and I just believed that kids should grow up in an intact family, no matter what. So for many years, I was sort of haunted by why couldn't I make this work? Or why what did I do wrong? Or, all the things. But then, as life started to evolve in the way it evolved, I could begin to see um, through a wider lens, rather than this myopic little lens of like intact nuclear family, which I think is beautiful. And when it works, I think it's fantastic. But then I started to see, well, how is it true that being divorced is actually the best thing for us? And so when I started exploring the opposite of what I was holding onto so tightly, then all of this new awareness started coming forward. And I really started to embrace, oh, I can see that the universe is really here for me, that this divorce is really here for me. It's not only here for me, it's for my ex-husband, it's for my kids, it's for all of our growth, for all of our expansion. This is actually the right thing. And there is no formula. There is no one right way for anyone to do any life. Like life is always leading you to the highest possible outcome if you follow life's guidance. And in my case, I spent a lot of time resisting it, which caused a lot more pain and a lot more suffering, which is why I do the
Mhm.
work I do now, because I help to support women to be less in resistance and more in a place of acceptance so that they can follow the flow of life. They can trust where
Mm.
life is taking them. And that even though it's uncomfortable, it was the best thing for my kids. Even though it was uncomfortable for me, it was the best thing for me. Even though it was uncomfortable for my ex, it was the best. It was like the curriculum each one of us needed to evolve.
Yeah. Wow. What a beautiful journey you've been on, and what a big difference I'm sure that that made. And that's, yeah, I love that idea of acceptance. It's not easy. And I think the reason a lot of times well, there's lots of reasons why we're resistant to acceptance of things that we originally thought weren't the right thing for us. I mean, it makes sense on just a basic level, but at the same time, I don't know. I feel like there's this, like we cause ourselves suffering when we quote argue with reality, as Byron Katie says. I love that whole idea of, not arguing with reality. Like even after your divorce, it sounds like you still had that resistance in your mind of like, this isn't supposed to be happening. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. Like this, you were wishing so hard that it was different, but it wasn't different. And until you got to the point of like, oh, how could this be good for us? Like, how could this be the way it is, quote, supposed to be, which there is no really supposed to be, like you pointed out. But yeah, so I really resonate with what you said there, and also definitely had the same similar upbringing as far as like, well, in my family it was just you don't get divorced, period, ever. Like, it wasn't even stay together for the kids; it was just stay together, period. I mean, nobody in my family was divorced, even like it
Yeah.
was, yeah. So I understand that kind of stigma and just that personal feeling of like, I'm not supposed to do this. This isn't okay. Um, yeah. And so I'm wondering, I mean, you went through all the phases of parenting with your children. I mean, co-parenting with your ex through all the different ages. And I can't imagine my significant other moving out when I just had a baby. That's already such a stressful time, and you're hormonal and you don't get enough sleep. And so I guess logistically at that time, what was y'all's custody arrangement like? Did you get any breaks, or I mean, your kids being that young, I'm sure it's hard to be away from them. So what was that like?
I remember I'll never forget the first day. Like I handed her over to him like for the weekend he was going and like, you're pumping and I was
Mm.
breastfeeding at the time. So you're like making sure there's enough milk. And I mean, it was heartbreaking. I think I just like sat on the floor at the front door and just sobbed as they walked out the door. It was hard to leave any of my kids at that stage of life, when they were so little and you still want to be like so much a part of every moment. And I got criticized for like, how could you let him take her at such a young age? And there was an internal battle for me, like maybe I should let him take the two older kids and I'll just keep the baby because I'm nursing and all these things. And it was so hard. It was so hard. And I didn't know the right thing to do. And part of me was like, well, no, like this is our reality. This is the agreement. This is the deal. Like, I also need a break. I'm like on 24/7 by myself. So it was harrowing to do it. And I do, like, if I remember correctly, I think I only did it a few times. And then I was like, this is not working. Like, she needs to be with her mom. She's way too young. Um, yeah, it was hard. I mean, it was just hard. I'm sure anyone listening in, I'm sure you had the same experience. I don't think it matters. Like, I wouldn't say it's gotten easier. I mean, of course, it's easier over time. It's like,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, my kids were a little older, when I got a divorce, but I mean, like you said, I know people listening can completely relate just to that feeling of like, I don't want to be away from my kids at all. I mean, that's a struggle I hear a lot of women talk about, no matter what their kids' ages are. It is hard not to be with your kids, as much as you would like. And I mean, I'll
and
just be honest and say that I have an amazing relationship with my ex-husband. We get along super well. We have always been okay with the other person coming to our house when we have the kids. And so we have a very open, and I know that's not super common. And I hesitate to even bring it up because I'm like, sorry to you all who don't have that. Like, I feel like I'm so lucky because I know so many people don't have that. But so I'm wondering how, co-parenting in general
yeah.
has been for you. And I'm sure it's evolved and changed over the years, but especially at the beginning, and how did you and your ex get along and co-parent?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say thank you for sharing that you guys have a great arrangement. I think it's inspirational. And it's, you know, of course, people want to work with someone who's been there and done that. So if you're doing it, people are going to want to know, like, how do you do that? And I think that's really valuable to walk the walk and be able to guide people there. And of course it takes two, right? It takes your willingness and his willingness, and you guys have to have a united goal. But then what do we do when the other does not have a united goal? We're seeing this played out in our government right now, right? Like when people are have opposing intentions or goals, what happens? What do we create? And in my case, there was just a lot of conflict in the early stages. We did not share a lot of the same values or ideas about the way to do things. And it was difficult. It was really difficult. And again, I got to learn how my resistance contributed to conflict. I have a program right now called Transform Conflict into Connection with One Simple Question because it's really what I learned. And what I learned was whenever I entered a conversation or a negotiation or anything from a place of fear, conscious fear or unconscious fear, most of the time it was an unconscious fear, I always ended up creating conflict and drama with my ex. And so I started to see this path, and the path was something like when I'm in conflict, I know that there's some kind of fear present. And so back to what you and I were talking about earlier on the podcast is I'm going to take responsibility over here for me, my relationship to me. I'm going to go look at how fear is contributing to the outcome I'm getting. If I'm getting conflict and drama with my ex around something happening with the kids, so anyway, when
Mm,
there's some kind of conflict or drama, I get to look at me. Now, that doesn't mean
mm,
there's not also some fear going on over there in the other. And we had so much of it because we just didn't agree on so many things. So now over time, that's still true. There's still so many ways we disagree. Our kids are grown now, they're much older, and there's still ways we don't agree. But um, back to your comment on acceptance, it's really been about can I accept where we are or we don't agree? Can I allow us not to agree and let that be? Like just not try and change him or not let him try and change me and let it be. And often, I'm sure you, and since, well, maybe you have such a nice situation, we don't run into this so much, but I'm sure many listeners, when we're in conflict with our ex-spouse and it's around a co-parenting issue, how like most of the time it's because we're trying to protect our kids. We believe that this is the best outcome for one of our kids, or and our spouse or ex-spouse believes something else is the best outcome. We don't agree on the best outcome. So our intentions is like we both want the best outcome and we both believe we're going to get there in a particular way. And often when I believe that he's making a decision or a choice that's going to cause them difficulty or, not create the best outcome from my perspective, right? Remember, it's my perspective. I could be wrong. Um, I have to trust that my kids can handle it. That even if it feels like an undesirable or an unfriendly outcome, that it's still perfect for them. They're going to still get some learning. There's still some growth will happen as a result of this. And the less I interfere, the better it is.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm assuming that has been true for you. I mean, as you've learned and grown and co-parented for so many years, it sounds like well, first of all, I guess my question to go back to what you said about fear being a big part of that equation when you were in conflict, how can we recognize when we are operating out of fear or allowing fear to play a big role in the conflict? Because a lot of times, yeah, I think it's hard maybe to notice that or to, I
Okay.
guess, what's a question to ask ourselves or what's something to notice about the fear?
Yeah. So I teach this question. The question is, where am I? And the question helps you locate yourself, not through your mind, because if you ask your mind will go, I'm totally reasonable and I like this is the right thing and they shouldn't do this, blah, 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 blah. That is the mind. So we really ask the body. So one way we identify ourselves in fear is by getting to know the signals the body releases to us. So whenever there's, for me, tightness in the jaw, tightness in the shoulders. Usually my hands are clenched. My breath is sped up. There's particular thoughts that I have. I have a whole worksheet and a whole workshop where I teach people to answer this question honestly, because we often answer the question from, a non-reliable place, from righteousness. So, the question is, where am I? And then the answer is, am I coming from love or am I coming from fear? And there's all kinds of clues. And we look at our behaviors, we look at our beliefs, we look at the things we're saying and doing, we look at our body, the way we're holding our body and our breath. And our body will reliably tell us if we're in fear. And when I catch myself in fear, which is fairly often, right? Because we're human, we're wired for fear, we're wired to protect ourselves. When I catch myself there, then it's my job to go do my work, right? So to go look at those fears, to go identify the core of those fears, to go question those fears. You mentioned Byron Katie, and to really get in right relationship to them, because whenever we're letting fear lead the way, we are going to end up in conflict and drama. It's just inevitable. That's just the way of things. So, how can I recognize, like, oh, this is coming from fear? This is coming from fear. And can I just love and accept myself for being human and being in fear? Like, that's just part of it. That's just the way of being human.
And as far as co-parenting specifically goes, have you found that the fear is mainly around your children's well-being? Like, is that,
Yeah. Oh, wait, don't you think
yeah,
so? Like,
yeah,
I
I think
think
so.
we're all, I mean, we're mamas. We're mamas. We
Hmm.
want to take care of our cubs, our baby cubs. And we, well, and as parents, of course, our spouses want the same, but a mother's love is so unique to protecting
Mm.
children. And we have all these false ideas about what is right, what is right for them and what's best for them. We have all these ideas that are not wrong, but they're not necessarily right.
Right. That's so true. And it's so easy to go to worst case scenario. I hear so many people, women in co-parenting relationships say things like, but if this happens, then this will happen, and then this will happen. And then I'm like, but do you know that? I mean, it's like projecting into the future, these catastrophic things are going to happen if this one thing occurs, which, like you said, we don't know that. So it's good to kind of check ourselves in that way. And I love what you said about recognizing your children's resilience or their ability to handle things or their ability to learn a lesson from something or get stronger. And I think that that's a
Yeah.
good thing to remind ourselves when we're so afraid of the effect divorce itself will have on our kids. Because how do you compare what effect an unhealthy marriage will have on kids compared to what a divorce will have on kids? Like, I mean, my kids have already verbalized to me some things that they even see now, only a few years after the divorce, that make me realize, oh, they already see the benefits, for their dad and I not to be together. Like it's nice when you hear it and or see it kind of in real time happen, but and you may not get that confirmation from your kids. But I just think it's important to remember, yeah, that just kids will learn the lessons and develop the skills and the characteristics that can be really positive things for them, despite us believing that, oh, this isn't the best scenario or the right situation. Yeah. So I think that's a way we can kind of assuage our fears. And another thing I want to just speak to really quick about what you said about the blame game is that as long as we're blaming our ex for anything, what happened in the marriage or co-parenting things, if we're always looking to them as, oh, they're the problem, if they just weren't doing this or saying this, or if they agreed with me on this, or then we don't have the capacity to look at ourselves at all. Like I think it's so easy to just point the focus over there, that they're the problem, that then we don't even get the opportunity to ask the question, how could I be co-creating this conflict? How can I be, what am I doing right now that's contributing, whether or not it's I'm letting fear lead me and that's causing, distress. It could just be as simple as that. But yeah, I just think that's important to remember because the only person we can truly control is ourselves.
Yeah,
And
it's true.
so,
But
yeah.
I also I think it's important, and I want to kind of emphasize this because we're talking a lot about fear. It's important to recognize that our fears are totally normal and acceptable, and they make sense. And the fear itself isn't the problem. And it took me a long time to get that. I was making my fears bad, like get over it or stop it or don't be afraid. It's sort of like, we have this whole like movement around anxiety, like stop being so anxious, and it's like, no, don't stop being anxious. Like my fear is informative. My fear is helpful. It's useful. I want to get into right relationship with my fears. So for those listeners out there who are listening, I really want to make that point very clear. Like, fear is not bad and wrong, but when we give it too much power, when we're not in right relationship to our fears, then and it's controlling us, then we got to take a closer look. So it's totally normal. We're human beings. We're going to experience fear. Like that's just the way of it. Um, but here's our opportunity to start getting clear about those fears and cleaning them up so that we can lead from a place of empowerment because you cannot be in your power and in fear at the same time. They don't coexist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I totally agree. And I think that goes for almost any quote negative emotion that we don't like having as humans, is we tend to think, oh, we just need to get rid of that or never feel it, or it's not okay if I'm feeling that, especially even if you're kind of in the self-help, personal growth space. I think we can get into that trap of almost like we need to become these enlightened, perfect humans that never feel fear. And and it's just not realistic, like you said. And I really like using that analogy of just driving a car. We don't want fear to be in the driver's seat. Fear can be in the back seat or even the passenger seat. And we can look over and be like, okay, yes, I see you. You're a part of this. You're in this car with us. We're all going on this journey together through life, but we don't want you in the driver's seat. So
I love that too. I love that analogy.
yeah, yeah.
What do
And
you
so
suppose
how would you,
contributed?
oh, go ahead.
What do you suppose contributed to your easeful transition with your ex?
Well, historically, we always got along really well. Like in our marriage, we really didn't argue. And I think probably because I'm so conflict avoidant, or I was before, and I was always a people pleaser and a peacemaker. So I think that was probably a lot of it as far as just how well we got along, or just the avoidance of or not having a lot of conflict. But I remember, I mean, at the very end of my marriage, I had an affair, and that created lots of drama. My ex-husband was understandably very upset and angry with me for a little while. So, there were a few months there that were rough and made me question, how is this going to go after we get the divorce? And I really honestly I credit him a lot because and I remember it was almost like a moment in time where he just decided, wait a minute, this isn't best. Like to move forward with this much anger or animosity or toward her is not going to be good. Like I remember he even said, this isn't going to be good for our kids. And so I think he made a conscious decision at that time that like for us to get along really well is going to give our kids the best experience of divorce and help them have the most likely positive outcome. So I think he kind of made that conscious decision. And
That's hard.
yeah, I think we just both really focused on what's best for the kids. And I don't remember, oh, and I shouldn't try to quote a book I can't remember the title of, but I remember I read a book at the time about divorce that was really focused on that. And the premise of the book was basically like divorce itself in and of itself isn't bad for kids, but it's all the conflict,
Yep,
and it's the
true.
where the kids feel like they're in the middle, or they feel like they have to choose sides, or they hear one parent talk bad about the other. And it was just all of that. And I was like, oh, okay, yes, I want to try to follow all of this to make sure. And I cannot remember honestly if my ex-husband read that as well. I probably did give it to him, so maybe he did, but I don't know. I just think we sort of both made a conscious choice to
I love,
prioritize the kids' well-being. So,
and that's takes a lot of strength because
hmm
live in that place of resentment and anger and hurt and all of that. We can choose to do that, or we can choose to accept what is and let it go and move forward. So I applaud your ability to do that with one another.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a huge, huge blessing. And also, I was a stay-at-home, full-time stay-at-home homeschooling mom, when we got the divorce. And I remember my ex-husband expressing fear that the kids would automatically want to be with me more and that he was afraid he would lose the relationship he had with them. And so I was really conscious to make sure that they had a good I wanted to foster their relationship with him. I never wanted to make him feel like I was trying to take the kids away or that I wanted them to be on my side or like to love me more or anything like that. So I think I also made sure that I never ever said a bad word about him because, obviously, and it's so funny. We had a conversation just recently, he and I did, which was great to kind of hash out some things that happened. But the affair itself is not the reason we got a divorce. There were years and years leading up to that of a lot of things he did that he fully accepts responsibility for. And I think that's another reason he was able to move past the affair part of it because he realized things got to this point for a reason. And these were not all Angie's fault. So he was able to look at his part in the kind of breakdown of the relationship. And so I think that was also really helpful.
That's always a co-creation, always. And if there
Hmm
is never the reason that a marriage breaks up, it's always a co-creation of that. And so to be able to really both of you take 100% responsibility for the part you played, accept things, and then decide to move forward in this place, of like kindness and compassion is such a gift to your kids on so many levels. First, it models like this is the way an ending can also take place. Like it doesn't have to be World War III. It can just be like this conscious agreement to dissolve our relationship, move in a new direction from love, from kindness, from compassion, from understanding. Like it's just not working. We don't have to make the other a bad guy. And it gives them the freedom not to have to choose sides, not to have to blame, not to have to make anyone at fault. Like it takes so much stress off the kids.
It definitely does. It really does. And I mean, obviously my kids have each struggled a little bit in different ways, I think, with the divorce or just the adjustment, but overall, they have all done amazingly well. And I just don't sense there's not a lot of tension. I mean, we've always done big holidays together still. We do the kids' birthdays together. We're in the same physical spaces together so often that our kids almost feel like, oh, we still have the same family, but we just have two houses. Like that's kind of what it feels like. And it's, yeah, I'm just really, really, really thankful. Very thankful. We've gone on vacation together. Like we've just done a lot
That's
of things
really nice.
together.
That's
Yeah.
really, really nice. That would not happen in my system. But
Yeah.
again, I just want to honor all paths. Like that might not be the
Hmm.
best path for everyone. And it's so great that it works for you guys. And my kids
Hmm.
actually specifically asked, like, can we please not do that? Like we've tried to do things like that. And they're like, can we please not do that again? So we're like, okay. So I do think another thing about co-parenting and parenting, and like when my kids were very little, when my ex and I got divorced, so we made all the decisions for them, like Wednesday nights and every other weekend, and this is how it was going to work. And now they're in their 20s. And, I've sat down with them this past holiday season. I said, you guys are like grown now. Like these the settlement agreement that your dad and I came up with when you were 5 and 3 and no, 0, it probably doesn't work for you still. And you guys should now tell us what works for you. Like, what do you want to create? What do you want now? Because their lives are different. They're in relationships themselves. It's hard for them to share time with our family, our new family system. I'm remarried now and we have more kids, and their dad's remarried. So it's like a lot of people to divide your time with. And it's just you're constantly evolving. And I think the more choice that you give your kids as they age, go through stages of life, to really decide for themselves, like what's working best for them, the
Hmm.
it's a gift also.
Yeah, we actually switched our custody agreement after maybe about a year or two because we were doing like a 3 day, 4 day kind of swap in the middle of the week thing because we didn't want to go for a whole week without seeing our kids. And we didn't, so we thought that was kind of best for everybody to have more time, but switch off more often. And the kids spoke up and said, this is exhausting. Like we're constantly packing up stuff and we're going back and forth and like, oh, which day am I, here? And so then we just decided to go to a 1 week on, 1 week off. So Sunday night to Sunday night, we switch off. And like I said, whoever has the kids, the other parent is welcome to see them at any time, talk to them at any time. So it works well. But yeah, it was helpful just to listen to the kids' perspective because they're the ones having to do that, and having to go back and forth and transition. And so I think it is important, especially as they get older, just to listen to what the experience
All
is like for them.
that packing and unpacking and moving, it's just not fun for them.
Hmm.
I love that
Yeah.
you guys, I love that you guys were able to do that and collaborate with them.
Yeah. Well, I have loved this conversation. Is there anything else that you want to speak to that we haven't really gotten to yet?
Hmm. I think the big message that I like to leave people with is really get honest with yourself again and begin to ask yourself that question, where am I coming from right now? Am I coming from a place of love or fear? And how honest can I be with myself about that? Like it's not easy to face the parts of ourselves that kind of create conflict and drama and disruptions in relationships because we do it. Whether we like to believe it or not, we are co-creating our experiences. So to really be able to look yourself in the mirror and be radically honest with yourself and take responsibility for what you're co-creating in your life and seeing that like you are a powerful creatrix. As a woman, you have the connection to life itself and you're a powerful creator. And when you create from that space of love and trust, um, you can do anything.
I love that. And I love that point because it's not about blame. It's not about saying, oh, it's my fault. that I'm helping create this dynamic. But I think it does empower us so much to recognize the the power we do have in what we are creating. And a lot of times, like you said, it's sort of unconscious. And so when you can become conscious of it, like you said, take a good, honest look at where you are, where you're coming from. I think it's I think it's so freeing because then you feel like less of a victim. You're not dependent on someone else changing their behavior. You're not dependent on your ex showing up differently. You can decide to show up differently. And I mean, when you show up differently, it is going to change the dynamic. Like I'm not, and like we said, you cannot control your ex or anyone else for that matter, but when you are contributing to a dynamic, when you're the one who shows up differently, something is going to shift and change. And if you're in a better place, I can only imagine it will be a positive shift.
Yep. And it feels really powerful when you do that. It's so much more powerful than the opposite. It doesn't sound like it, but it really is puts you in a position of power. And yeah, that's my greatest piece of feedback. And I think one last thing I want to say is anytime there's a couple of clues I give, and I said I have this workshop that helps you really get radically honest with yourself. Um, and use this question as a source for getting honest with yourself. But the one tip I'll give people as we sign off is if you believe you're right about anything, you can 100% know that you're coming from fear and you're in a place of
Mm.
fear. Anytime you're in a state of righteousness, he said this, he shouldn't have done this, she shouldn't have done that, this shouldn't be happening. Anytime. And you can just practice noticing yourself, like use the political landscape that you're in because it's so easy to watch the news and like get on a side. So it's really easy to catch yourself in righteousness. If you're in righteousness, you are absolutely trying to control something, and that's a good sign that you're coming from fear.
That's great. That's a great tip. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for sharing everything you shared. I've totally loved this conversation. I'm so glad we connected. And I know that everyone listening will definitely benefit from what you shared. And if people want to find you, where's the best place for them to follow you or get in touch with you?
AnnMarie Chereso, I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes
Yes.
because spelling that is tricky. Dot me and on Instagram, AnnMarie Chereso, same. Those are
Okay,
my
awesome.
handles. And
Okay, great.
thank you, Angie. Lovely to be with you. And yeah, I just love the model you're being for what's possible when we come from a space of, true love and compassion and understanding.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on. If you're feeling lost, overwhelmed, or unsure of how to move forward after your divorce, I've created a free guide just for you. It's called the 5 Stages of Divorce Recovery, and it lays out the roadmap to help you heal, rebuild, and love your life after divorce. This guide is packed with insights and actionable steps that will take you from grieving to embracing your future with confidence. Click the link in this podcast description, and the free guide will be delivered straight to your inbox.